And very excited to have you today, Kane. How are you?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm good. Thank you. Yeah, not too bad. It's a pleasure to be here and glad to chat today. Any excuse to talk conversation design. So I'm glad to be here.
That's awesome. And a lot of people in our audience are writers in tech, people that are writing copy for user interface, mostly visual interface, but some of them also doing conversation design. People that coming from the background of copywriting and marketing and journalism, and getting a and I also want to have a glimpse about the world of voice interface design and to learn more from you about conversation design, which is a field that I've been, I remember they used to call it just
Mm.
chatbots, right? Like
Yeah,
4 years ago
yeah,
or 5 years ago, just chatbot writing.
yeah.
Now it's like this whole universe of conversation and design, voice UX. So it's awesome to have you.
Yeah, thank you. It's probably started with chatbot design and stuff like that, and then obviously over the years, you have your likes of Alexa and Google Assistant and stuff like that tend to crop up, and that's kind of almost for a while our aim has always been to kind of try and join together all of these disparate parts of what I think is really the same thing, which is chat and SMS based messaging, kind of bots and agents and assistants that basically use the fundamental technology, which is NLU, natural language understanding, and then voice assistants on this side or voice bots on this side. Could be assistants, could be in the contact center, could be a voice assistant in an app or on any other interface like a smart display or TV. And that fundamentally uses the same back-end technology as well. And so I see them both as the same thing. And so our sort of mission with VUX World is to be trying to kind of align all of that stuff. And really, it's all kind of starting to come together a little bit. Some people still, you have chatbot designers over here that kind of still think it's one thing, and Alexa skill builders over here that think it's another. Then you got like contact center people over here that think that that's something else. But really, it's all just part of the same stuff, really. And the fundamental principles of conversation design apply to any conversational interface, regardless of whether it's a speech or text kind of input.
Yes, awesome. I remember that I was looking for like voice interface podcast maybe 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, and I think I was in Berlin back then. It was in 2019, I think. And I think yours was one of the only one around that actually talked about like what I thought more people should talk about. So I'm very happy to have you around and to have you today.
Thank you. Yeah, appreciate that. Yeah, it's been going for probably it's coming probably 3.5 years, so I think it is now.
Mm-hmm.
And the time when I launched it, there was only two other podcasts that were around, and they were in the US. And I registered the domain name VUX World with the idea of doing a podcast about voice user interfaces. But there was nothing around. There was literally nothing. I couldn't find anybody on Twitter. I couldn't find anything online. Couldn't find anybody anywhere to talk to about it. So I thought, well, there's no point in doing a podcast about it if I can't even find people to talk to. And then I think around about the November time, I think Brett Kinsella launched the VoiceBot podcast in around about November, I think it was. Bradley Metrock launched This Week in Voice, probably around about the similar time. And I found them in December, or maybe late November. And I thought, well, there's two in the US. There's something happening in the US. Somebody must know about this stuff. So I ended up just, reaching out to a few people, land up a few interviews, and then it kind of just went from there, really. And we launched in January. So we were the only one in the UK for a long time, and one of three of the main kind of ones that people tend to reference that are still kind of going.
That's awesome. All right. So people here are live, and without further ado, I'd love to introduce you to Kane Simms, co-founder of the voice consultancy and design studio, VUX World, and also, of course, the creator of the VUX World podcasts. And that's about it, Kane. Take it away.
Thank you. Cheers. Yeah, I'll try and share my screen. I've got some slides. What I'll do, I'll run through a few slides, and then we can do some Q&A afterwards. Who knows how long it will take? Sometimes it takes me longer than other days, but we'll see. We'll see how we get on. Okay, let me just pull up this situation. Who can share? Hold on. Share my screen. Here we go. Let's just have a look. Are you seeing what I'm seeing? Are you seeing the slides or not? No? Yes? New
Yes,
message.
I can see it.
Yes.
I was
Okay.
muted. Sorry, I was
All
muted.
right. Left me hanging there. I was wondering what was going on. Cool.
By the
All
way,
right.
Ken, I'll put my eye on the chat. If there are any questions, I will moderate the discussion. And in addition, if you want, I can do some follow-up questions to your slides and so on.
Yeah, I know there was a couple that came through in an email from either yourself or one of your colleagues beforehand, so we can get to those at the end if you want. If people are asking questions throughout, feel free to ask questions throughout, and if you want to interrupt and just throw a question when it's relevant, please do so. It's better to ask them and answer them in context rather than wait until the end. But if you've got general questions or anything like that, then feel free to save them to the end. I'm not really precious either way, really. So really what this is just a walkthrough of some kind of principles, foundational considerations really for creating conversational user interfaces. Voice user interfaces do have some differences to chat interfaces. If you've worked on a chatbot, for example, in the past, and you obviously you work on a voice bot, if you just take the exact same process and principles, you might end up running into a little bit of hot water only because of the way that people interact with voice interfaces versus chat. But we can get into a bit more of that in future. This is almost like an intro to conversation design. So if there's people tuning in who are familiar with conversation design, you're experienced in designing chatbots and voice bots and things like that, there may be some things in here that you're familiar with. If you're brand new to it, you're a copywriter, you're a UX writer, you're looking to try and learn more about this field, you're interested in breaking into it, then this is probably more up your proverbial straza. So I'm Kane Simms. I'm the founder of VUX World. We've been designing conversations, implementing conversational AI and voice user interfaces for about 3.5 years. We train conversation designers, we coach conversation design teams, we design conversational user interfaces, and we implement them as well. And so really we cover the breadth of a project lifecycle, helping organizations understand what an appropriate strategy should look like, what an appropriate approach looks like, technology considerations, resource considerations, skill set considerations, all that kind of stuff. Use case planning, validation, testing, road mapping, implementation, the whole 9 yards really. And over the years, we've built up a decent amount of experience. We've worked with some large brands in the UK, Europe, and the US. We've worked with large agencies as well, and voice specific agencies as well. And so me and the team have got a fair amount of experience, and I would say we've got our fingers on the pulse of the conversation design sector, industry, and subset of UX. And so in here we'll kind of walk through really some of the things that we've learned. So this is a little bit like teaching your nan to suck eggs. What is a conversational user interface? Sounds a bit basic, but essentially what we're talking about is anything that has conversational language as an input, and that whatever the input is, the system that receives the input is able to then understand it and do something off the back of it. Doesn't always have to respond in a conversational manner with text or speech. It could do something for you. Like if you ask your smart speaker to turn on your light, it's a conversational interface because the input is natural language, but the response is doing something for you. So a conversational user interface is anything that accepts either speech or text or natural language as an input, is able to understand that language and then do something in return. And you're probably familiar with smart speakers, chatbots, messaging bots, social media bots, WhatsApp, SMS messaging, those kind of things. And that's kind of what they are, conversational user interfaces. What is conversation design? Well, the definition that I like to take from VoiceFlow, and if you're getting into conversation design, you've never designed a conversation before, I would definitely recommend you check out VoiceFlow. It is one of the best design tools out there. It is fantastic. The team, Braden Ream, the co-founder, and the team there are doing some fantastic work. So conversation design is the process of designing a natural two-way interaction between a user and a system, either via voice or text, based on the principles of human-to-human communication. What people think when they hear about conversational user interfaces is that the whole point of a conversational user interface is to be able to have a conversation with a system. The definition of a conversation is a two-way exchange of information between two parties. Now, we don't always actually need to have a conversation. We don't need to have a verbal or textual response from the system, as I mentioned. So we're not designing actual conversations all the time. We're just designing interfaces based on the principles of conversation. And the best way to think about that is there's a guy called Oren Jacob. He's ex-Pixar. He used to run the technology team that built all the software that created the animations for the likes of Finding Nemo, A Bug's Life, Toy Story, all of those kind of films. He designed Woody's hat in Toy Story. That's Oren Jacob. And he left Pixar. He created a company called Pullstring. And Pullstring, for a long time, in probably 2018 time, were one of the kind of premium voice design tools. You could design in there, you could publish in there, you could publish Alexa skills, Google Actions, and all that kind of stuff. They got so successful that Apple acquired them. The interface, the way they approached the design tooling was so good, Apple actually acquired them. And so now all of that tooling behind the scenes is sitting behind Siri. But we had him on the podcast in 2018, and he had a really good analogy of how to think about conversational user interfaces. And because he used to work at Pixar, and he built the software, his team built the software that creates the animations in all of these films. One of the things they were trying to do is design water, right? They wanted to design flowing water. And so the task that they set themselves was, can we design water that is so high fidelity that somebody could look at our image of water and an image of actual water and not be able to tell the difference? So they set themselves a little task, and they created a video, an animated video of just a little bit of water, a flowing river. And they had a real image, a real video of an actual river. They put them side by side, and they got one of the big bosses down to say, can you tell the difference between these two? And the person who was looking at it and reviewing it was stumped for a while, had a real close look, and in the end they actually did manage to find and highlight the one that was animated. So Oren's point in this is that the goal of animation in that instance isn't always actually to create something that will fool a human brain into believing that something is real. It's just to be a good enough representation of it so that the human brain understands what it's supposed to be. You're not trying to convince somebody when you create Finding Nemo that everything is real. You're just trying to create enough reality for people to understand what's going on and believe the story that's happening. And he draws the same kind of analogy when it comes to conversation design. We're not trying to actually create conversations. We're not trying to create all of the same complexities and all of the same kind of like human likeness that happens in a conversation. What we're trying to do is use the principles of conversation. So the quote that he says is, the goal is not to mimic exactly what humans do, but to find the qualities that are naturally present in our interactions and bring them to our designs. At the time, it was Alexa and Google Assistant, but now think of it broadly as conversation. So, for example, in a normal conversation that's been had between two people, if I ask you what the weather is and you respond to me by saying, do you know my car got a puncture last week? That's not really how conversations go. You're breaking one of the rules of a conversation, which is to keep in context and keep in topic and exchange relevant information. So the idea is that we base our designs on the principles of human communication. We're not trying to actually recreate it. So why do we want to base our designs on the principles of human communication? The real reason for that is because a conversational user interface, in theory, is actually easier to use than any other type of interface. As long as you can, for a chatbot, as long as you can write or type, you can use it. And beyond that, for those that are not literate, as long as you can speak, you can use it. In the case of a voice user interface, you don't need to teach somebody how to speak, and you don't need to teach somebody who can write how to type. So if an interface is based on language, something that we all use and are brought up with, it should be easier to use. And that's the whole point of a conversational user interface. Base it on the qualities that exist in natural conversations so the interfaces are easier to use. And so why has conversational user interfaces become prevalent, and why are you here today? You've obviously heard of it somewhere. You may be following the conversational design trends, conversational user interfaces, the rise in conversational user interfaces, rise in smart speakers, the rise in chatbots, all that kind of stuff. And there's a few stats here. I won't go through them all. I'll circulate these slides afterwards if you want to go through them in more detail. But there's a number of things happening. This is looking specifically at smart speakers and voice user interfaces. 8 billion voice assistants will exist according to Juniper by 2023. So that's not necessarily 8 billion versions of Alexa. every skill on Alexa could be classed as its own voice assistant. Every voice user interface in an app potentially could be classed as a voice assistant. Every time you call a call center and you get an automated agent on the other end, that could be classed as a voice assistant. 8 billion different types of voice assistants are forecast to exist by 2023. 38% of the US have a smart speaker. It's actually a little bit more than that now. And more than 30% of the UK have a smart speaker. We're getting to the point where if you were to draw that bell curve of technology adoption, the adoption curve, we're in America, they're around about halfway through that. There's almost 50% now, I think, of America that have got one. In the UK, we're getting into the early majority. So it's no longer an emerging thing. It's actually becoming an established technology and an established device. More than 50% of people use voice assistants on their mobile. It's the most common device type for voice assistants to be used on. My dad even uses a voice assistant on his phone. And so if that's not adoption, I don't know what is. 58% of people say voice assistants, and this is interesting. 58% of people say voice activated personal assistants either are or already have transformed their expectations of companies. The way I like to think about this is if you think about Google when it launched the search website, over the years, what we've been done is we've been trained by Google what good search looks like. And so much so that now when we go on any other website in the world, if there's a search box there, we have expectations of it because we've been trained how a search box works by Google. When we search for something, we expect a result. We expect a result quickly, we expect it to be accurate, and we expect it to resolve our query. Amazon have done the same kind of thing when it comes to shopping. You know, remember that the one-click purchase that Amazon had for a long time? Amazon's checkout process obviously has been refined so much that it is almost nigh on perfect, and that's their business. That's what makes Amazon one of the biggest companies in the world. That's what makes them money, and so it should be. But our experience of checking out on Amazon has then changed our experience and expectations of what it feels like and what the expectation is to check out on any other website. So Amazon, Google, those companies with all those resources perfect something, get it adopted, change people's expectations on everybody else who's using anything similar. And we're starting to get to that point, and we will get to that point with voice user interfaces. Google Assistant and Amazon Alexa, through repeated usage over time, through repeated value exchanged over time, people are even now beginning 58%, this is actually 58% of millennials, over time are beginning to expect that same level of service, that same type of interface with other brands and other companies as well. And even on the chatbot side of things, Salesforce saw a 600% increase in people using Salesforce chatbots last year during lockdown. We had Greg Bennett, their head of conversation design, on the podcast, and he gave us this stat, along with a whole bunch of other tips. If you're interested, definitely check that out. Microsoft, same kind of thing. Microsoft's Azure bot framework saw 4 billion messages sent in 2021, and this was 2 months ago when we had them on the podcast, so it's obviously going to be more than that by now, which is a 400% increase in consumer usage throughout 2021. So voice assistants are being adopted quickly, and this next slide here will show you how fast they're being adopted, which is, hold on, can you see that? Or is that, are you seeing that next slide, or are you seeing what I'm seeing, which is a bit of a dodgy, oh, there you go. Oh, that's not very high resolution. Anyway, you can get the gist. Smart speakers took basically 2 years to reach 50 million users, is what this is saying. And the aeroplane took 50 years to reach 50 million users. I think, or it might have been 70. The car took something like 25 years. The TV took something like 12 years. The smartphone took 5 and a bit years. Smart speakers took 2 years to reach 50 million users, which is the fastest growing consumer technology ever. And so lots more people are using chatbots and voice assistant chatbots on websites. A lot more people are using voice assistants and smart speakers and mobile voice assistants. So this is where the interest and where the hype, if you like, is coming from. It's because there is just so much adoption and so much activity happening in these fields. The problem, this is doing it again. I don't know what's going on here. Given that, we kind of think it's new. We think that voice user interfaces, voice assistants, chatbots, we kind of think that it's fairly new, because mainly when we started hearing about them, it was all through your likes of Google Assistant, Microsoft Cortana, if anyone remembers Cortana, Siri, Amazon Alexa, those chatbots that appeared on websites, 5-6 years ago or whatever. But voice technology has a natural language understanding has had its roots for the last almost 100 years. It's been in development for that long. So the Voda was the first artificial speech synthesizer. So every time you hear Alexa talk to you, that technology, that synthesized voice has been in development and it being iterated on over time since 1939. Audrey was the first speech recognition system, not natural language understanding, but speech recognition. You could talk to it, and it would recognize what you're saying. It understood it, about 9 words and about all of the numbers, basically. And then IBM released the Shoebox, which was almost like a voice initiated calculator. Absolutely terrible by today's standards. It's absolutely rubbish. But it was in 1962 when you were able to talk to a computer and do calculations. Harpy started to develop not quite NLU, but some of the principles behind NLU, such as these nodes that connect different things together that are looking for different phonemes and trying to work out the construct of a word and stuff like that. The first example of a consumer-based voice user interface was actually in a toy. It was in Julie in 1987 in America. And I see we've got a question coming through here. Where's Hal? Yeah, good point. There's quite a few, actually. It's interesting because out of the movies, you've got Hal, the one that Charles Cadbury from Say It Now used to reference all the time, which I quite like, is Kit from Knight Rider, talking cars. And he actually had a watch that had a voice user interface on as well. He could talk to his car. That was in like the 80s and stuff like that. So we've kind of been dreaming about all of this technology and all of these possibilities for quite some time. But it's only since Google Now, which turned into Google Assistant, Cortana, Siri, which was acquired by Apple, and Amazon Alexa. It's only since they've started to become more prevalent that we've really started to understand or started to realize that kind of how-based vision of our personal assistant. But it's got a lot of history. So that's that. That's the adoption. That's the rising adoption of conversational user interfaces. That's a little bit of history behind voice technology. If there's any questions now, I can pause for a minute and let that sink in a little bit. I know I kind of rattle through this stuff quite quickly. So if there's any questions, feel free to stick them in there. If not, we can. Yuval, if you've got any questions, Yuval, then happy to pause for a minute there.
So I have a question about, so it's not that common in my country for now to use voice interface. I guess it's because of the language barrier, but I'm trying my best here to use some Google Assistant, voice assistant, whenever I can. But what are the most common use cases that you've heard of that are related to conversation design? Like, is it ordering pizza, or is it the lights in my bedroom, or what are, I would love to know about those common use cases, basically.
Yes, the most common use cases by far on smart speakers, is playing music. That is by far and away the most common use case. The second most common use case is asking general questions. So, what year was David Attenborough born, or something like that, is the second most common. Then under that, you've got a load of other things that all kind of bunch up together, which is just general things like setting timers, getting things like recipes, listening to the radio, listening to the news, playing podcasts. 70% of activity on smart speakers right now is listening to some kind of audio, news bulletins, radio, podcasts, music, things like that. So smart speakers, they've got a terrible amount of potential, huge amount of potential. It's just that they tend to lend themselves more naturally to ambient audio devices. So there is examples. We've built a skill in 2018 for a restaurant chain in London, which enabled you to order a takeaway on Alexa, end-to-end ordering, including payments. You could open the skill, place an order, leave the skill, having paid for it, and have the food arrive at your door. So we were doing this in either the back end of 2018, start of 2019. The issue is that at that time, the adoption of those kind of use cases wasn't quite there. People used it, but it wasn't a wild success. I think they've actually they paused it over COVID because they just paused it over COVID. But essentially, the potential is there, but the consumer trust in making transactions wasn't there in 2018, 2019. There's been some research recently from Vixen Labs, which is showing that trust is coming, and some more research from Voxley, which is showing that over the pandemic, 40% of people trust the smart speakers more than they did beforehand. 50% of people have used them more over that kind of period as well. So those kind of use cases, those kind of transactional use cases ordering food, that kind of stuff, booking taxis. I think we'll see more and more as people start to build trust in them. But the most common use cases by far and away has been audio consumption. Chatbot is slightly different. Most of the chatbot use cases you'll find are still Q&A. Most people try and start a chatbot having a Q&A style feature, which sometimes works, but it can be detrimental because Q&A is very broad and shallow, lots of questions, but not very much depth as far as the answer. Sometimes you might be better off trying to start narrow, but having something with a bit more depth, actually solving a user's problem from end to end. But most of the chatbots start with Q&A, and then they'll start branching into more transactional things, like I need to cancel my hotel reservation or whatever the case may be. So yeah, that's the most common use cases.
That's awesome. And first of all, it's amazing, yes. And I really wonder, like, for example, I'm trying to think about the opportunities here. So isn't the landscape of, for example, ordering food, isn't it kind of covered by all of those delivery companies? For example, Walt, for example, do they have like some kind of a conversation design bot that gives you an end-to-end solution for your food delivery, or you still have those independent creators for conversation design apps?
Yeah, at the moment, most things are independent. We're starting to see industry-specific solutions. So there's a company called Casisto that have a platform called Kai, and that is really a chatbot that is focused purely on financial services. So if you were to plug that in tomorrow, it would probably be able to handle a lot of things like, what's my balance? Can I transfer some money? What are your mortgage rates? Those kind of financial questions. It'll probably be able to handle most of them out of the box. There's companies who are trying to crack certain parts of the puzzle. There's a company called Seeker Tech, which are looking purely at kind of agricultural in the field kind of use cases. There's a company called Alan AI, which are focusing purely on voice enabling apps for people working in the field, like oil rig workers and things like that. There's companies, McDonald's have acquired one, which was focusing purely on drive-through use cases. There's quite a few companies in the drive-through sort of space. And so you're starting to see companies sprout up that are trying to solve very specific problems. And we'll see more of that in future, whether it's Deliveroo or Just Eat that have their skill. They don't yet. Just Eat do, but it's not very good. But we're starting to see more kind of narrow industry-specific applications of the technology, definitely.
That's awesome. Very exciting.
Yeah,
all right,
yeah.
thank you.
Cool. All right, we'll crack on. So this is all about the anatomy of a conversation. Basically, when we talk about conversation design, what actually are we talking about? What is a conversation as far as the technology that we've been discussing so far is concerned? So this fundamentally is the architecture behind, in this instance, it's a voice bot, but it could well be a chatbot. The only thing that would be different with a chatbot really is that this speech to text bit wouldn't be here, and this text to speech bit wouldn't be here as well. There's other technologies that exist, lots of other technologies that exist that merge a lot of this stuff together, like SoundHound and Vlooper and Speakeasy. There isn't quite as much of a distinction between speech recognition and natural language understanding, but by and large, most of the common systems that you'll see today operate a little bit in this way. So I'll explain it first, and then I'll talk through which elements of this concern a conversation designer. So you've got the end interface. It could be an app. It could be the call center that you call up. It could be a smart speaker. It could be a train ticket machine in the train station. Whatever that end point is, has to have some form of either a keyboard to input the text or a microphone to receive the text. It's better to explain what happens with a typical voice interface, because that's the full picture. So if it's a voice interface, let's say you go to the train station or you open an app and you open your Uber app and you say, can you pick me up in 10 minutes? What will happen is that audio is recorded and then it's sent to the cloud, streamed to the cloud, and it goes through what's known as an ASR. It's called automatic speech recognition. And what that does is it takes the audio, the speech that you've inputted in that audio, and it translates that into text. So if you say, can you pick me up in 10 minutes to your Uber app, when you say, can you pick me up in 10 minutes, all the Uber app hears is a bunch of audio. It's just a bunch of frequencies. The ASR takes those frequencies and turns it into the text that you've actually said. And it will just turn it into a text, line of text. Then it will feed it into the NLU, which is natural language understanding. And the NLU's job is to extract the intent behind that. When someone says, "Can you pick me up in 10 minutes?" What do they actually mean when they say that? And in the NLU's case, what they mean is, "I want to book a taxi." So that text will map to a book intent. Okay. Then what will happen is there'll be a piece of dialogue management which will receive that. It'll say someone's asked to book something, right? They want to book a taxi and they want it in 10 minutes time. And so the dialogue management then works out what to do with that. So that there'll be potentially some API connections that will go to your back line of business systems. In Uber's case, that will go to the booking system, and it will feed other data into there as well, like the location and the time and all of this other stuff. And it will then return which car is available to pick you up. That response is a text response, which will be something like, we've got a driver 10 minutes away and it'll be £5 or whatever it might be. That text is then sent in a voice interface to a TTS system. It's called text to speech. And what that does is it takes the text and it reads that text out back through your app. Okay. That's the basics of a voice user interface. Text in, speech in, translates it into text, feeds it through an NLU. The NLU extracts meaning and any data that's relevant, like the time and the date and all that kind of stuff, puts it into the dialogue management. The dialogue management then decides whether it needs to go and do something behind the scenes or whether it just needs to put a response back to the user. The response is a text response, and that text is fed to a TTS to be read out at the other end. That's the basics of it. It gets more complicated than that, obviously, because if I say something to Uber like book me a taxi in 10 minutes, then Uber might need to say something like where from. And you might say, well, wherever I am right now. And so that's part of the dialogue management, is to, when it receives a booking intent and it says 10 minutes, there'll be what's called an entity, which is a piece of data that might be missing, which is, for me to book you a taxi, I need to know where you want it from, or I need to know where you're going, or I need to know how many people it's for, or I need to know what time you need it. All of those bits of data are what's called entities. So that's the basics of the kind of pipeline, if you like. And a conversation designer, and we'll get to specifics on the writing part of it and the value that the UX writers and copywriters and stuff like that can bring. And I'm happy to spend some time on that as well at the end. But the first job of a conversation designer or a conversational AI team is to figure out, one, what use cases make sense. What are people actually asking you about? What conversations are you already having in the business? What things are people clicking on and doing on your website? What services do you provide? All of that kind of research to figure out what a good use case looks like. That could be doing things like listening to call recordings or understanding what people are calling about in the contact center. It could be looking at the website or the app and understanding which pages or which services or which transactions are being used more. It could be interviews with customers and things like that. It could be looking at your website search. It could be a whole bunch of activity that goes into finding out what a good use case looks like. When you've understood what a good use case looks like, you need to understand what people will be saying. How will people start a conversation? How will the conversation go, as far as the kind of flow and the journey through the conversation? So understanding how people speak and the phrases they use is one of the jobs of a conversation designer, because what we need to do is we need to pass that into the NLU. And so the other job is to specify what kind of intents are required within a conversation. So in the Uber example, maybe we say that we want to start out with allowing people to book taxis, which would be a book intent. So we specify that we need a booking intent. And we also might say that there are certain parameters that we need in order to fulfill a booking, which might be, where are you leaving from, where are you going to, and when do you need it, for argument's sake. Later on down the line, once you're live, in fact, actually during the design, you need to provide training data to the NLU. And this is where a copywriter will come in, is that once you understand the kind of language people are using, you will need to feed that into the NLU as training data. So the way that it works is that if you want to train a book intent, you will provide sample phrases to it that will be the kind of things that people will say in order to trigger it, which would be, I need a taxi, book me a taxi, can I get a taxi, can you pick me up in 10 minutes, I'm going to Manchester tomorrow, what time can you get here? All of those different phrases that people will use to trigger that book intent, a conversation designer will specify. Then at the dialogue side, we're specifying how the logic in a conversation goes. So, for example, if I am using a takeaway voice user interface, I want to order a pizza, and I say something like, I want to order a pizza, when the dialogue management receives a request, which is someone wants to order a pizza, there's certain things that need to happen in order for that pizza to be ordered. So the dialogue manager will understand and define what comes next. So when someone says, I want to order a pizza, the dialogue manager will say, okay, if someone wants to order a pizza, we need to know what topping. Do you want to order for collection or delivery? So that's where we'll define the logic of the conversation, which says when someone says, I want to book a pizza, the dialogue manager will say, okay, you want to book a pizza. Do you want to do it for pickup or delivery? The user will then say delivery. The dialogue manager will then say, okay, so now it's delivery. So what pizza would you like? I want a margarita. Fantastic. Do you want anything else? Yeah, actually, I'll have some chips. So all of that logic, what happens next in the conversation based on what's happened previously, all happens in the dialogue manager. And a conversation designer's job is to figure out what the best flow through that conversation is and how to get users from one start to the end. Part of that, and this isn't necessarily always for the designer, but the team involved will definitely be specifying what data requirements are required from any systems that happen behind the scenes. So in order to order a pizza, there will need to be a booking made in a system somewhere, and that system will have certain requirements of it in order for it to be able to make a booking. And so those system requirements need to be fed into the design, because we can't book a pizza delivery until we've given the system what it needs, essentially. Then the response, and this is some teams will actually have writers that purely focus on this part of this entire workflow, putting the responses together. What are we communicating back to the user? The reason why this is so important, and we'll come on to this in a bit more detail, the reason why that's so important is because when we're creating a conversational user interface, it's very difficult for people to realize that it's just a system that's throwing back text. Because to people, they're actually talking to someone. When you talk to Alexa, people call Alexa her, they say she. Or if Siri is talking in a male voice, they say he, they personify it, they anthropomorphize these assistants. Even though they know that it's not a real lady inside Alexa, still we have this personal connection and we feel as though we're talking to someone. And so the reason why the responses that we put together are so important is because how something sounds is crucial in making sure that a certain message is understood. It's also crucial from a brand perspective that you use the right kind of words, you speak in the right kind of tone, you use the right kind of language, and you're conversing with someone in the voice of the brand. From a chatbot perspective, if you are a bank, are you going to be using GIFs and emojis and being cheeky, or are you going to be fairly straightforward and down to earth? If you're a government organization, are you going to be being sarcastic, or are you going to be direct and serious? And so all of these considerations about how you serve your responses and the personality that sits behind the assistant is of huge consideration for conversation designers. And I think this is where UX writers and copywriters play a huge role. Playwriters and anyone who's written scripts or written dialogue or anything like that, written stories, all of those kind of skill sets are crucial here. And as I say, some teams have specific people that do nothing but craft those responses. And then finally, as I mentioned, how something sounds is just as important as what's said. And with TTS, text to speech, you can actually tune how things sound. You can, if you want to emphasize certain words or put pauses in or make something sound a bit more animated or a bit less animated, you can tune all of that with what's called SSML, which is speech synthesis markup language. Just think of it as like CSS for voices. So you can tune all of that here, and that's another thing that conversation designers do as well. So we've got a question here. Is it relevant to ask Jarvis? Is it relevant to ask about Jarvis or AI-based writing tools? There isn't specific writing tools necessarily at the moment. There are lots of design tools of which writing is a part of. So there's tools called VoiceFlow is a good one. Open Dialogue is a relatively new one, which is really interesting. BotMock, Bot Society, lots and lots of different tools that exist, and those tools will allow you to craft those conversation flows in that dialogue management I was talking about. They allow you to define what these intents are and what entities you are looking for, and the training data that you can provide. And they also allow you to write the dialogue, and you can actually test that as well. If you open up Voice Flow tomorrow, you could build a really simple flow, put all of the copy and content in, and then test it and have a conversation with it, either on an Alexa device or a Google device or just in the chat.
I have an advanced question, because I think I understand what Mikhail is trying to ask you. So Jarvis is a tool that is based on the GPT-3 OpenAI, basically the AI language processing that kind of generate itself. So do we have, and I guess it's an advanced question, and if you don't have the answer, that's completely, that's okay, but is there any like voice interface design tool like VoiceFlow that is using one of those GPT-3 or maybe other language processing kind of apps out there?
Not really. So GPT-3 is an invite only. It's based on an invite only at the moment, and there's only a very few commercially available examples of it. Algolia have got an agreement. Microsoft have bought all of the commercial rights to using GPT-3 from a development perspective. So if anyone's going to build, if anyone's going to build anything to allow you to design with it, it's going to be Microsoft. So and Jarvis is also, NVIDIA have got a tool called Jarvis as well. That's their conversational voice AI platform as well.
There is a tool named conversational.ai, and they just rebranded themselves to Jarvis. Right. And we use it in our team to write like blog posts and stuff like that. And it's pretty wild, to be honest.
Right. Interesting.
I'll send you a link if you want.
Yeah, that'd be useful. That'd definitely be useful. Sure. So there's no tools that I'm aware of that would allow, because what we're talking there is natural language generation. Essentially, GPT-3 will ingest a bunch of content, obviously that needs to be written, and then based on what's said to it, it doesn't use intents here. It's intentless, basically. It'll just match an utterance to content. And so over time, I'll look at that. Choose for that. Over time, what we'll see is let's go back to the slides. We'll see systems like Vlooper, like Google's Lambda, if you've come across that essentially the NLU doesn't use these intents. Essentially, what it does is it ingests a bunch of content, and then it uses an utterance to match against the best piece of content it finds for that. So I did a talk recently at Voice Talks. It's on YouTube. If you search for Voice Talks on YouTube, the talk I gave was about the future of conversation design, and in there, I kind of touch on some of this stuff, basically, which is that over time, as NLU gets better, a conversation designer's job is actually going to be more about writing content. Because if you use Jarvis, if Jarvis is used for blog posts and stuff like that, and more companies are starting to move towards like headless CMSs where they just have content that sits there and can be accessed from anywhere, whether it's an app or a website or, whatever, smart speaker. And so the importance of crafting copy that is to be read is going to become more and more important, because crafting copy that's purposefully written to be said rather than read. Because something that's read, you can scan it easily, we can get the gist of it, we don't even read most of it half the time. But something that is said is entirely different. If you go to the BBC writers' room, they've got loads of examples of scripts from old shows and stuff like that, dramas, comedies, the whole lot. And if you read some of them scripts, or if you read any script from any film, you will find that the dialogue in the script and the dialogue spoken on screen is entirely different from the dialogue that's in the book. Again, Oren Jacob did a fantastic example. I actually cut out an example on the podcast where he said, if you open up Harry Potter and you read a paragraph of Harry Potter and then go to the film and you listen to the dialogue spoken, it was entirely different. And it actually is, because when you write something, you write it to be read. And when Alexa says something to you, it's being written to be said. And so all of this content that we're creating, and we're putting content in more accessible places, like in headless CMSs and things like that. So the aim over the next years will be for writers to begin writing content that is intended to be spoken as opposed to being read. So I'll whiz on, because I know we're kind of getting towards the end. I want to save some time for questions. So there's some qualities that make for successful conversations. So these are, one, being used based on everything on natural language. So Don't tell people how to talk. Don't say, if you would like to confirm your booking, say yes, because telling people how to talk is a little bit patronizing and it defeats the object of the interface. The job of a designer is to do the hard work to figure out all of the ways and the phrases and things that people say so that the interface works. And you don't have to figure out them all, because the machine learning behind the scenes will do you a helping hand if you provide enough training data. But the aim is not to teach people how to say, it's to let them use their own language. The other thing is to be flexible. People don't go through conversations in a if this then that linear kind of fashion. This example is taken from the Virgin Trains Alexa skill. It allows you to book a train, but if you first of all ask about train times and then you find a train time, you can't just say book it and it book you the train. You have to go all the way back to the beginning of the skill to then tell it that you want to make a booking, then find your train in the time, and then make a booking. And it's because it's been done in this rigid tree-based structure. So the aim of designing a conversation, you may use these tree-based structures to represent your design, but at any point in time, you need to be thinking about what questions will users have, what comes next, what needs will they have after they've got this piece of content, and design it so that it's flexible so people can go to one place, get a question answered, and come back to where they came from. That's why authors are seldom successful at adapting novels for screenplay. Exactly, because writing for screens is entirely different. It definitely is. The next things are to be clear. When you do something and when you design, especially for voice user interfaces, you've only got a split second of time. Audio is ephemeral, it's gone. As soon as it's been said, it's gone. So you need to be as clear as you possibly can and leave no room for ambiguation, basically. Leave no room for people getting confused. Same with a chatbot. You don't want to be over the top. There's some chatbots that you see that you will ask a question to and they will post a massive paragraph of text. And before you've had a chance to read it, they'll post another massive paragraph of text. And the first paragraph bleeds off the end of the screen. And so it's just over the top. You need to be concise. If you can't say it in one breath, don't say it. You need to do something else and be clearer in what you're doing. I've touched on persona already. Every single conversational user interface has a personality, whether you like it or not. Clifford Nass and Scott Brave wrote a fantastic book called Wired for Speech. And in there, the research in there have found that if someone listens to a voice, they can make all kinds of assumptions, and they do make all kinds of assumptions about it based on where the person's from, whether they're educated or not, whether they're male or female, what kind of mood they're in, what kind of age they are. There's all kinds of stuff you can infer from the sound of someone's voice, and you can get a glimpse into their personality. And so crafting a personality is really important, because if you don't, Kathy Pearl, and I've got some all these books are detailed in the back of here, but Kathy Pearl's book, Design and Voice User Interfaces, one of the things she says is that because of that, everyone will create a personality in their head for whatever bot they're talking to. And unless that personality is designed, you run the risk of everybody having a slightly different kind of understanding of the personality of this bot. And from a brand perspective, it's a bit like not designing your logo, but are now allowing every single individual to just make up what they think your logo should look like. If you design it and you put it out there, at least there's going to be some consistency with how people understand it. The next thing is sound design. So as I mentioned, because audio is ephemeral, and as soon as I've said it, it's gone. With voice user interfaces, an undervalued tool is to use sound in order to create the interface and make it a bit better. So if something has been successfully paid for, you don't have to say that's been successfully paid for. You can make the noise of a cash register doing a ching, and that communicates that something's been successful. If someone says, or if somebody, I don't know, a game is a bit of a woolly example, but if someone gets a question wrong in a game, for example, you can play a sound that represents that something is wrong. In recipes, it's a good idea as you go through the steps. So if you're giving someone instructions, as you go through the steps, the tone or the introduction to that text can be a noise or a chime that increases in pitch as you go through to give the feeling of progression, things like that. So sound can help users orient themselves within an experience, and also can help you communicate what's happening in the experience as well. And then a framework for conversation design. I've got there's a good talk I gave about this a while back, which I'll put the links in as well. Ben Sauer, he's doing some work with us at the moment. Ben Sauer is absolutely fantastic design strategist. His concept is to design the right thing first and then design the thing right after that. First thing you want to do is find the right use cases, design the right thing. Next thing you want to do is make highly successful conversations by designing the thing right. And so you're probably familiar, if there's any designers out there, you'd be familiar with the double diamond design. In conversation design, we use this kind of quadruple diamond, and we've got a sprint framework that basically takes you through this whole process. You start with the user research and creating empathy and understanding and exploring the problem. Then you define what problem and what need you're actually going to serve. Then you can sketch up some examples, just literally draft in some sample scripts and decide which one of those kind of like conversations you want to take forward. Then we'll do some role play, sit back to back on a table and actually have a conversation between two people. And that gets iterated on. And then all of a sudden you can decide whether or not this is something you want to move forward with. If it is, you'll take those sample scripts, you'll build a prototype, and you'll test and validate that prototype. And then you'll move into scoping and speccing out the implementation. The talk I mentioned about the future of conversation design, this is a little screen grab from it. Basically, I've got a whole massive whiteboard full of this kind of stuff, and I walk through every single part of it. But this is the process of designing a conversation. Researching requirements gathering at the beginning, sample scripts and role play after that, prototype, test and iterate, testing with real users, and then documenting the requirements and how the design should work. Then you've got the development and the Q&A, and then you've got the cycle of launch, learn, and level up, which I call the 3 L's. Most people launch something and forget about it. All copywriters who've worked on websites will be familiar with that. Most people will launch a website, put it live, and aside from if you've got a content strategy, most other people won't touch most of the pages on the website. They don't often change things. With conversations, people are having actual active conversations with you, and you're not always going to meet their needs. And so you need to learn from it. You have to understand what people are saying at each part of the conversation and where you're failing so that you can correct it. And also to get ideas for new use cases as well. And finally, writers, as I mentioned, I've touched on it throughout, writers have got skills that are crucial now and will become even more crucial in future as conversational interfaces begin to make their own decisions about what content should be served where. That content needs to be written in a way that is written to be said. And all of those things I mentioned about having the right kind of personality, having some consistency, and all that kind of stuff. And copywriters know that every single word has to fight for its place in every single piece of writing that you'll ever do. Every single word has to fight for its place. And with conversation design, every single word is absolutely crucial. Every word needs to fight for its place. And it is, I think, the most rewarding type of writing, because normally you'll write something and you write it and that's it. People might feed into it and read it and comment on it and stuff like that, but ultimately you write it and then you put it out there and that's it. You might get some feedback, but by and large, it's kind of like post and then it's gone. With conversations, you're writing a dialogue and you're having a dialogue and you're writing you're coping with the kind of twists and turns and all that kind of stuff. And so writers have got a real good foundational skill set. Couple of books here. Again, I'll send you the slides. I won't read through them all here, but there's some good books if you're interested in it. And obviously there's some decent podcasts, which I've mentioned at the beginning as well. And that's it. That's it. I know I've kind of rambled for a bit there, but that's fundamentally an overview of conversation design.
Wow, Kane, my mind is blown right now. So much information.
There was a lot there, and I appreciate I was flying through it quite a bit as well, because I was looking at the clock and I was thinking we're getting a bit short for time here as well.
We're going to share the recording with people so they could rewatch it, and just the idea of the fact that we can start building conversation design stuff right now. I'm really eager to check out voice flow right now and play around with it. And I'm really inspired. I didn't know that the market of voice assistant is that big right now. And when you had a slide about the adoption and how fast it got into 50 million users in like 2 years, that's really opened my mind. And also when you mentioned Greg Bennett, I remember seeing him in a voice conference a few years ago, and he's doing so much for the Salesforce company. So that was awesome too. And we would have to share a link also to your conversation as well. We have a few more minutes. If anyone have an extra question, now it's the right time to do that. And I see that Emma is adding a question. Have there been any unintended consequences of voice-based user interfaces?
There's been unintended consequences from Amazon's perspective. I think it was in 2019 when the story broke that they were shipping off all of the audio data to India and Indonesia for people to listen to it and transcribe it and train Alexa's models. That comes as a bit of a surprise to people outside of the industry. Like, what's Amazon doing, sending all of my voice data over to the Philippines or whatever to have people listen to it? Then everybody found out that Apple were doing the exact same thing. For us in the industry, we knew that there's no way that you don't do that, because anyone who's ever launched any conversational user interface will know that when you make it live, that's the beginning of the journey. Changing and training and iterating it based on how people are interacting with it is crucial. And so there's no surprise there, but I think people got people outside the industry got a bit of a surprise. The unintended consequences and really start to come home when you start thinking about bots that make decisions. So we've done some work in government, we've done some work in the debt collection space, and in those environments, the bot holds a degree of power, because a bot can tell somebody that they can't pay £10 on their debt and that they have to pay £50. A bot can also tell somebody that their passport hasn't been validated for whatever reason and now you can't go traveling. So bots in some instances have power, and there is a real ethical question that needs to be considered when you design about how you handle that exchange where the bot has most of the power. There's also other unintended consequences that are being debated at the moment about what does it actually mean when a 2-year-old or 5-year-old is talking to Alexa that sounds like a female and doesn't hear what he says, and he starts hurling abuse or she starts hurling abuse at Alexa, mostly he. What does that do for his understanding of a woman's role in society when the female sounding box in the corner of his room never understands what he says, or the female box in the corner of his room always does exactly what he says? What does that mean for his perception of other female sounding females in the world? So there is definitely some ethical considerations to consider with all of this kind of stuff. And you need to consider that when you're designing anything, really.
All right, that's
Deep.
super. It is, and I'm really curious. Like, we have to finish now, but I'm really curious to know. Like, so did they send the audio data and they translated it live in India and the Philippines, and then send it back? And that was like Siri for a while at Apple and the Amazon voice bot.
So what happens if I say to let me see if we can get this working. Alexa, what does shamalama ding dong shui wei mean?
Sorry, I don't have an answer for that.
Right. She doesn't have an answer or it doesn't have an answer because shlamalama shui wei means absolutely nothing. I completely made it up. So, but that is now a failed response on Alexa's side, isn't it? Now, what Amazon wants to do is it wants to understand all the times it fails and understand what was said so that next time that thing is said, it doesn't fail. And in order to do that, think about how many people talk to Alexa every single day and how many times Alexa says, sorry, I can't do that. Amazon wants to get that accurate. And if you look at the studies, actually, over time, it's able to answer more questions. Siri is able to answer more questions. They improve over time because they find all of these things that are not working. And who's going to transcribe that? Who's going to work out what was said and what should have happened? And so the way that they do that is they hire contractors in other countries with cheaper labor, and they send them a big bunch of audio and they say, what was said here and what should have happened? And they transcribe it and they send it all back. And then the team at Amazon will update the models, put answers in for questions that didn't have answers before. And over time, it gets better. They've also got something called Alexa Answers, which is a crowd-funded thing. So sometimes on Alexa, you'll ask it a question and it will say, according to Alexa Answers, here's the answer. And that's just a way that people who use Alexa can feed into and help Alexa get a bit smarter. But yeah, it's all part of improving it and making it better over time, basically.
Amazing. And okay, that's about it, by the way, people. Ken, I love your setup so much that I think it would be really awesome to have you on our podcast, Writers in Tech. Would you be interested to be my guest?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So I'll send you an invite and stay tuned, everyone, for an episode Writers in Tech podcast with Kane, and we're going to keep this discussion about the future of voice interface. I'm thrilled to have that discussion because I have a taste for more now.
Good, looking forward to it. And
Amazing.
if you are interested in those discussions, check out VUX World every single week, sometimes twice a week. We do live broadcasts on LinkedIn. Feel free to connect with me over there. I'm posting videos all the time about this kind of stuff and little tips and tricks and stuff like that. And yeah, we do the podcast every week. And if you're interested in it and you want to learn a bit more, feel free to check it out.
Awesome. All right. And thank you everyone for joining us today for another show brought to you by the UX Writing Hub. Feel free also to check our website, uxwritinghub.com. We have a weekly newsletter. We also have the Writers in Tech podcast. We have a free UX writing course that I really recommend all of you to check. And we're going to send you the slides and the recording of this talk today. And I'm going to see you on our next event. We're holding these kind of events at least once a month. We're aiming to have it twice a month. You can check our events calendar on our Facebook group, Microcopy and UX Writing. That's about it for now. See you on our next event. And thank you very much. Bye, Kane.
Cheers. Pleasure.
Cheers.
See you
Bye.
soon.